Roll call. I guess we have to start over. Roll call.
Mike Davis, Ty Valley.
Russell Hargrave, Mosier.
Lynn McIntyre of the Dalles.
Vicki Ashley Maupin. Staff.
Jim Foster, the Dalles.
For staff, Wasco County Planning Division Director Daniel Doherty.
Wasco County Community Development Director Kelly Husley Glover. And I'm also joined by Senior Planner Sean Bailey and Associate Planner Armando Negrete.
This meeting is being recorded and will be publicly available. All participants must mute themselves unless they are speaking. Lines providing feedback while not speaking will be muted to ensure others can hear. Only you can unmute yourself using the mic icon. If you are participating by phone, unmute yourself by dialing *6. Participants behaving inappropriately will be promptly removed from the meeting. The chair will specifically, invite participants to public comment at appropriate times. So please be patient and wait on the call. Please refrain from using the comment feature unless directed by the chair. It will distract from the intended flow of the hearing's procedure. Public comment on items not listed on the agenda. Is there anyone wishing to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on. We need to approve the minutes of the previous meeting from April 1, 2025. Discussion? Anybody have any comments? Does anybody remember?
This is Lynn McIntyre. I move to approve the minutes of April 1st, 2025.
This is Mike Davis. I second.
We have a first and second vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Minutes approved. Thank you. Next on the agenda is to promote Vice Chair Vicki Ashley to chair and elect a new vice chair. Under normal circumstances, the vice chairperson is anticipated to become the incoming chairman. And a new vice chair shall be elected. Nominations for vice chair open.
Are there any volunteers
Yeah.
for the new vice chair position?
I believe all of us have served at one time or another as chair, so maybe Jim.
Sure.
Jim spoke up and said he would be vice chair.
Sure.
So Jim Foster, you're volunteering to be vice chair, is that correct?
Also known as the rookie.
Okay. Just making sure minutes are picking this up, so.
Right. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you, Jim.
Yes.
The public hearing is now open for the purpose of the Planning Commission's Commissioner's consideration of land use file number 921-25-00053-PLNG. An update to the National Scenic Area Land Use and Development Ordinance. The procedure I would like to follow tonight is Community Development Department staff will present their report, provide an opportunity for public to testify. The Planning Commission will deliberate and make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and the hearing is scheduled for 2 hours. We will try to conclude the hearing by 4. Testimony be limited to 3 minutes. Staff will time each comment period and mute when the 3 minutes have expired. Rules of evidence are as follows. No person shall present irrelevant, immaterial, or unduly repetitious testimony or evidence. If you have submitted written comments, please do not state it in oral testimony unless you have further information to add. Evidence received shall be of the quality that responsible persons rely upon in the conduct of their daily affairs. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the criteria applicable to the subject hearing. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements of evidence sufficient to afford the commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes further appeal based on that issue. Staff presentation. Ask all participants to mute themselves and hold the questions until the end of staff's presentation. Clarify with the commission if they will hold questions until the end. Have staff take periodic pauses to answer questions or interrupt the presentation to ask questions. Direct staff, you can start.
Thank you, Chair. Give me 1 second. Oh, shucks. Let's see. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Doherty, Wasco County Planning Division Director. Today, I'll be providing a brief overview of the very lengthy packet that the commissioners have been able to review concerning our National Scenic Area Land Use and Development Ordinance update for 2026. It's a fairly straightforward agenda. We're going to talk very briefly about the overview and timeline of the events that kind of led us to this update. And then I'll provide very high-level highlights of the proposed ordinance amendments. So June and July of 2025, as I believe we're all aware, there were some devastating fires, the Rowena and the Bourdain fires, that caused the loss of numerous both residential as well as accessory structures, buildings. During the 2024-2025 Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan update, the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan for Wasco County Steering Committee identified potential issues with expedited post-disaster review. We did identify this issue as an action item number 5, and we essentially called it expedited post-disaster permitting. So it was on our radar that a fire in the National Scenic Area or a disaster in the National Scenic Area could very well cause significant issues pertaining to the replacement of dwellings, accessory structures, and buildings. Unfortunately, the fire happened just as we were updating our natural hazard mitigation plan. So these two fires essentially forced us into examining the criteria within the management plan as well as our land use ordinance. Wasco County planning staff as well as community development director worked with the Columbia River Gorge Commission staff to propose potential updates that would hopefully expedite post-disaster review and allow for certain temporary structures. On January 13th, 2026, Columbia River Gorge Commission voted to approve those amendments. And this was followed up by concurrence letters. and a requirement for Wasco County to now adopt those changes in the management plan into our land use ordinance. So I'm just going to go chapter by chapter. And again, I'm going to just kind of provide the very broad highlights of the proposed changes, the proposed amendments. Chapter 2 is essentially dealing with due process requirements, so notification requirements and review type. It really provides Wasco County with review authority of these types of applications and discusses the review procedure. In this case, it will, whether it's a temporary use request or an actual post-disaster request, it will be an administrative review. An administrative review essentially means that a director or designee, an appointed person, shall make that ultimate review and decision. And then, of course, it does discuss what's provided or what's expected of a decision for both types of review. In the National Scenic Area, there are essentially two types of reviews. There's a full review and an expedited review. Very little wiggle room. However, this makes it clear that certain types of reviews, post-disaster reviews of existing or structures that had been existing, and we'll get into the legal nonconforming piece of this, shall be reviewed as an expedited review. Chapter 13 is our nonconforming uses, buildings, and lots chapter. It essentially deals with legal nonconforming structures, what is legally nonconforming, what we consider to be legal nonconforming. The majority of the alteration or the proposed amendments are within this chapter. It really is the substantive criteria that's being changed. So it's not necessarily procedural. It expands allowances for replacement structures under the expedited review. It clarifies some resource protections that we're seeking to provide through our ordinance. And it allows a replacement timeline of 10 years. So it gives folks that have lost structures the ability, well, a longer ability to replace those structures under a permit. And I think it's important, some of this was, well, all of this was discussed when the management plan was updated thoroughly. But I do want to point out that those timelines were vetted. That's somewhat of an average for survivors. That's the timeline it takes them in many cases to actually replace their structures. This diagram is kind of an example of what folks are allowed to do. Replacement structures must be centered on the original footprint, maintaining an orientation of 10 degrees. The new footprint can only extend up to 10% beyond the original. So we are allowed to go larger, build larger, and slightly move the structure and orient it. In many cases, these are far more lenient than the current provisions, as our planners and of course the survivors have found out. It's designed primarily to protect cultural or potential cultural resources. So that's why the current code is very strict with regards to being able to expand a structure out when you're replacing it under an expedited review. And of course, the calculations, we have to include porches, covered porches, decks, garages, attached breezeways. These provisions are much more lenient with regards to the current code. So it will give folks the ability to replace what is otherwise potentially a structure that was built in the 1950s, a very small structure. It will allow them to purchase and or build a larger structure under the expedited replacement provisions. Chapter 16 is very rarely used. It's our emergency and disaster response actions chapter. However, we have added provisions to accommodate the management plan update, allowing for temporary uses. So as I explained earlier, the average timeline again is roughly 10 years. And so folks want to live on their property in many cases, or they want to be on their property, or they want to store items on their property while they are rebuilding. This will allow, under certain circumstances, folks to provide for temporary uses, a temporary RV for residential uses, and a temporary accessory use for the storage of materials, tools, etc. There are very specific provisions they have to meet, but this is a new allowance. So with that, as I said before, it's fairly straightforward. We're simply adopting what is otherwise already adopted under the management plan and incorporating those changes into our land use ordinance. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. We're asking the Planning Commission recommend to the Board of County Commissioners acceptance of these proposed amendments. We've got tentative hearings scheduled before the BOCC on July 17th and June 17th and July 1st. And that concludes my presentation.
I have one question. On the original footprint, you could rotate it. Can they also go up like a second story?
They would still have
Yeah.
to meet, I believe, I think it was,
The square footage?
yeah, square footage, and I think it was the original height.
Okay, they can't exceed the original.
No, they can't exceed the original height. I have a good memory, but sometimes.
Well, it just seemed like if they wanted to increase, if they could go up a little bit, it might help.
Now, I will say that the planning division staff have been excellent with regards to full reviews for post-disaster relief. So if folks choose to have a much larger dwelling and they can meet the current existing standards in a post-disaster environment, we are, I think with this Rowena fire, we've had a lot of lessons learned. And so, at least from the planning division staff, we are, I think, much more efficient in helping folks because of this experience. But in any case, these new amendments will help folks replace their structures, their dwellings in an efficient manner under an expedited review, and also allow for temporary uses, which isn't allowed expressly in the management plan or our ordinance.
I have another question. Will any of these temporary ordinances apply to the outside of the scenic area, or is this just strictly scenic area?
These provisions are specific to the National Scenic Area, but under Oregon state law, there are a lot of provisions that allow for the use of RVs in the case of disaster. And again, this was pointed out in our Natural Hazard Mitigation Steering Committee that the National Scenic Area didn't necessarily have these expressly provided for within the management plan. And so we identified it. The fire unfortunately happened. And then, of course, we began to, and I say we, the Community Development Department, as well as Planning Division and the Columbia River Gorge Commission staff began working on trying to find a path forward.
So Dan, do these have sunset provisions in them then? They're referred to as temporary provisions.
10 years. So they co-align essentially with the maximum allotted time for the permit. So you would, in theory, a survivor would apply. They would achieve an expedited permit, say it's approved. They would have up to 10 years to get things going. And I think it takes into consideration the other items that aren't necessarily directly linked to land use, such as septic system issues, infrastructure, other things that aren't always directly linked to what's allowed and what's not allowed.
This is Lynn McIntyre. I have a question. Daniel, in section 13.070, A2, we're talking about replacing a structure that has not been destroyed by disaster, non-conforming structure, and it says the replacement structure may have a different size and or location than the existing structure. But then we go to B, where we're talking about those non-conforming structures that have been destroyed by disaster. And it says that the replacement structure shall be in the same location as the original structure and utilities. And I'm just wondering why they're both non-conforming structures, why they're being treated differently.
One second to pull up the packet so I can actually look at the. Sorry, Commissioner. Let me pull up the packet so I can see what you see. That may be something that we have to correct. Okay, and
Get over there to Mike.
Hi, for the record, Sean Bailey, Senior Planner, Wasco County Planning Division. The current language I think is similar. The idea is B, when you're replacing a structure due to fire loss or emergency disaster, there's less scenic restrictions, but you can't increase in size or move under the current language. But if you need to do those things, you have to go back up to A, because A will have additional standards that B doesn't. So that is, I believe, the way the current language is. B has less restraints, but if you can't meet all of the qualifications for B, you have to go back up to A to meet those findings, which are a little more based on like building a new structure.
so essentially A is more restrictive because it's a standard replacement of an existing non-conforming structure. Whereas B takes into consideration post-disaster loss, the fact that it's no longer there, or it's significantly damaged, and provides for expedited review.
But A doesn't have expedited review.
That's correct. It would be a full review.
Okay, it just seemed kind of strange that you would treat the non-conforming structures differently, but that's just me.
And I think that the idea is to help address post-disaster losses, the fact that one individual has a home, has a dwelling unit, whereas the other doesn't have a dwelling unit. I think that that was the intent of the amendments, to ensure that folks that had lost everything had an ability to at least apply for an expedited review, knowing some of the timelines that scenic area land use applications can take.
I can be really frank too about the conversations that happened. Even getting to the point of disaster recovery and being unable to have an expedited permit was very contentious, particularly with respect to cultural resources. And so we did come to terms with tribes and the Forest Service on this piece, Lynn, Commissioner McIntyre, but that's why you see the discrepancy.
Okay. Thank you.
So may I ask excuse me, a procedural question? Do we need to adopt the findings of staff and then move to recommend to the commission approval of the proposed changes? Is the adoption of the findings necessary?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
I would so move.
Are there any further questions from commissioners?
This is Lynn again. I just had a comment on section 16.070 in C and D. It refers to the local government. And I just wondered if that ought to be clarified to Wasco County. I know it's a template that you had to adopt, or had to put in place.
If it's expressly within the management plan, if it's language expressly within the management plan, we have very little room to change that. We could potentially say Wasco County as opposed to the local governments. I don't see any problem with that, considering the fact that it's our local ordinance, National Scenic Area Land Use and Development Ordinance for Wasco County. So
Okay, thank you.
I think it's just always safer sometimes to just sometimes adopt directly from the management plan. But in this case, I don't see an issue with that.
Is that your recommendation, Lynn, or was that just discussion?
Yes, I mean, if anybody else is reading this, they're like, well, who do I go to for this? You know, it's just makes it clear.
Thank you. Any further discussion? We have a motion on the floor.
Clarification that it
So
would,
could-
that the new motion would have to
Right.
include the
Recommendation from
to chapter 16, 070.
members.
So you're amending the motion to include Lynn's suggestion?
Yes.
Okay, I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 I
Opposed?
There's one request before we finalize the vote.
Sorry.
I don't believe we requested public comment.
I did at the beginning.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the public has had an opportunity.
Is there any
comment.
public comment on this? Hearing none. Motion adopted.
I apologize, Chair. I just want to make sure we're
Uh-huh.
following procedure. So,
Procedure.
okay. I think we're ready for the second hearing.
We're ready for the second hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, I see that. I'll get to it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
I'm gonna sit over there if you guys want to stay there, or if you want Ally to go.
Yeah, we'll stay.
The second phase of the hearing today is file number 921-23-000-143-PLNG. Again, this meeting is being recorded and will be publicly available. All participants must mute themselves unless they are speaking. Lines providing feedback while not speaking will be muted to ensure others can hear. Only you can unmute yourself using the mic icon, and if you are participating by phone, unmute yourself by dialing *6. Participants behaving inappropriately will be promptly removed from the meeting. The chair will specifically, invite participants to public comment at the appropriate time, so be patient and wait until called upon. Public comment on items not listed in the agenda. I'll ask speakers to please limit their testimony to 3 minutes. Invite the public to unmute their mics and share any comment they may have on items not listed on the agenda. Are there any? Hearing none, we'll move on to the hearing. This is the second of 2 public hearings scheduled for today. The second public hearing is now open for the purpose of the Planning Commission's considerations for file number 921-23-0000143-PLNG. A scenic review and conditional use permit for a recreational vehicle park or campground, which includes recreational vehicle sites, tent camping sites, a restroom and shower building with an office space, and 1 centralized large solid waste collection site to be used to collect and transport solid waste off-site. The subject parcel lies within the National Scenic Area boundary and is located on the immediately west side of Highway 30, 750 feet north of Irving Street West, northeast of Chenoweth Creek Road, approximately 750 feet north of the Dalles, more specifically described as tax lot number 2N13E 29-100, account number 914. The subject parcel is within the A1 large-scale agriculture zone in the GMA and SMA, GMA also A1 160. The criteria for approve of the land use decision includes the following chapters within the National Scenic Area Land Use and Development Ordinance for Wasco County, the NSA LUDO also. Chapter 2, Development Approval Procedures. Section 2.050 Wasco County Application Authority Basic Provisions. Section 3.120 A1 Large Scale Agriculture Zone in the GMA and SMA. Chapter 5, Conditional Use Review. Chapter 11, Fire Safety Standards. Chapter 14, Scenic Area Review. Chapter 17, Recreational Vehicle Parks. Chapter 23, Sign Provisions, as well as referenced Oregon Revised Statute ORS 446.310 and 446.350 and 446.435. Rules and regulations governing the construction and stationary operation of travelers' accommodation and tourist parks. The proposed development must comply with applicable provisions contained in the management plan of the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, generally unless otherwise noted. If a request is found to be consistent with the NSA-LUDO, it is considered consistent with the management plan. Party recognition. Anyone can speak for or against the proposal today. Automatic standing is provided to the following parties: the applicant and all owners or contract purchasers of record as shown in the files of the Wasco County Assessor's Office of the property which is subject for the application. B, all property owners of record as provided in A above within the notification area as described in section 2.080 A.2 of the property which is subject to the application. C, any affected unit of local government or public district or state or federal agency. B, any person or his representatives who is specifically, personally, or adversely affected in the subject matter as determined by the approving authority. E, any person who is heard by the Planning Commission orally or in writing before the close of the hearing. Procedure. Planning staff will present their report. The commission may then ask questions of the staff. The applicant owner will have the opportunity to testify. The commission will call upon anyone who wishes to testify in favor of or in opposed to the proposed use. The applicant owner will have the opportunity to rebut. Once there is no further testimony from parties, the commission may ask further questions of staff and then will decide if it is appropriate to close the public hearing. Once the hearing is closed, the commission may ask questions, deliberate, and then vote the decision. The rules of evidence are as follows. No person shall present irrelevant, immaterial, or unduly repetitious testimony of evidence. If you have submitted written comments, please do not restate in oral testimony unless you have further information to add. B, evidence received shall be of quality that reasonable persons rely upon in the conduct of their daily affairs. C, testimony and evidence must be directed to the criteria applicable to the subject hearing. D, further, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes further appeal based on that issue. E, any party of record may request that the record may remain open for at least 7 days prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing. F, failure of persons to participate in public hearing, either orally or in writing, precludes the person's right to appeal to the Board of Commissioners. Written testimony submitted prior to the hearing constitutes participation in the hearing. Disclosure of interest of ex parte contact. Does any commissioner wish to disqualify themselves for any personal or financial interest in this matter? Hearing none. Does any commission member wish to report any significant ex parte or pre-hearing contact? Hearing none. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the right of any commissioner member to hear this matter? Hearing none. Is there any member of the audience who wishes to question the jurisdiction? Turn the page. Of this body on behalf of Wasco County in this matter? Hearing none. Staff presentation. Ask all participants to mute themselves and hold the question until the end of staff's presentation. Staff, will you present, please?
Yes, I'll be presenting, Chair.
Thank you, Kelly.
So for the record, Wasco County Community Development Director, Kelly Housley Glover. And I've got a very lengthy presentation, so I'm going to try to click through it pretty rapidly. It is a brief of the very lengthy staff report. So what I'm going to do is give a brief introduction, discuss very briefly the proposal, a summary of staff analysis, share with you the comments that we received to the record, and then give staff recommendation with recommended conditions of approval. Before I start, I want to make a record correction. There was a scrivener's error in portions of the staff report that referenced 30 tent sites. When we received a modified and updated application in March, because of the moving of sites to the north of the existing RV park, that number has been modified to 15. So again, it's 15 tent sites rather than 30 tent sites. The other introduction piece I wanted to state for the record is traditionally staff conducts all scenic area reviews. In the past, the Planning Commission served as the first appellate body for scenic area reviews until we moved to a hearings officer last year. However, because the applicant is the county and because this project is being developed with the intent of public interest, we thought it important that the Planning Commission be the final adjudicator on this matter. The other thing I'll state for the record is that I have not participated in the preparation of the application in order to preserve my neutrality as a reviewer. So the project proposal is, the location is on the west side of the Dalles. It's just north of the urban growth boundary for the city of the Dalles. It's in a 154 acre parcel. You can see here from an aerial image that, and I'll talk a little bit about the history of some existing RV park infrastructure. Chair discussed the township and range, but I'll just repeat that for the record. It's 2 north, 13 east, 29, and tax lot 100. It is 154.73 acre parcel zoned general management area A1 160, which is large scale agriculture. And according to Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area information, it is the project area specifically is in high intensity class 4 recreation class. This was the amended site plan that was provided by the applicant that demonstrates, and I'll just call out that those tent sites have moved to the north portion, so up to the top of the screen. But the goal is to utilize much of the existing infrastructure with the RV park as planned, as well as developing the existing homestead into a site for use by a caretaker. And the only real significant development aside from repairs on existing infrastructure is to site a 2,000 square foot shower and restroom facility. And the goal of that is to be compliant with ADA, but it's also to give folks an additional bathroom, particularly if they're a tent site.
Kelly, do you want questions at the end?
It's a very, thank you, Commissioner. It's a very long presentation, so my guidance would be to wait until the end so I can click through this pretty quickly.
Cool, no problem.
I appreciate the question. So 48 total RV sites, 15 tent sites, 96 off-street parking sites, 48 guest parking spaces. As I mentioned, 12 of the existing RV sites have been relocated, and that's to give a good buffer to Chenoweth Creek. I mentioned the 2,000 square foot public restroom and shower facility. There are also plans for a sanitary dump station and water facilities, and then, as I mentioned, repairs to existing infrastructure. It's important to know that this RV park was approved by a scenic area review in 1989. And it was recently approved in April 2026 for emergency temporary housing, including those infrastructure repairs. The goal of that was to assist for any potential long-term stays that folks who survived Rowena may need for site. And this, the wheels were put in motion of that ahead of our efforts to amend the management plan and allow for RV placement on site, which had not been an option prior. I want to call out that this property is in the Wasco County Comprehensive Plan, Wasco County 2040, and it has been since 1983 as a committed land. So it was zoned prior to the committed lands exception as commercial. As you heard, the current zoning is A1 160. So it was during the scenic area mapping and land use designation, it was reverted to agriculture, even though it had been identified by Wasco County and acknowledged by the Department of Land Conservation and Development as committed land and commercial in use. The other thing I'll call out is in our records, it very specifically talks in that committed land paperwork about being platted for a mobile home park because the property had relatively poor agricultural soil. And so that was the basis for the committed lands exception to goal 3. One of the unique things, reasons that staff has typically handled complex scenic area applications is that we do have to evaluate confidential information, specifically cultural resources, and then many natural resources. So sensitive plant species. So you will have noticed in the attachments an absence to the referenced historical and cultural survey and report, and that's because we need to maintain confidentiality with that information. And there's a long and storied history about why confidentiality is required, but I want to make it clear that that was not an omission. That is the standard practice for the way we do business, and that is to protect any cultural resources that are on property. So I won't be able to answer any specific questions about what is contained in that cultural or historic survey. I think I've got a slight delay. There we go. So all the relevant criteria, which Chair elucidated in her opening statements, are as follows, and this is in the staff report. Chapter 1, which governs basic provisions, or Chapter 2, which governs development approval procedures, basic provisions, which pertain to land use designations, conditional use review, fire safety standards, scenic area review, which is does the heavy lifting for the SNCRs, which are the scenic, natural, cultural, and recreation resources in the National Scenic Area. We have a specific chapter for recreational vehicle parks, and then a chapter specifically for sign provisions. An application was submitted on September 28th, 2023. At that time, I determined that the application was incomplete, and some of that pertained to what we anticipated was a needed large-scale, and that was confirmed by USFS, a large-scale cultural and historical survey. There's an outline in the staff report that talks about some of the history of obtaining that survey, but essentially, once all of those steps had been completed with respect to the cultural and historical survey, we received an update to the application and deemed it complete in March 2026. Just as further background, the property consists of 2 legal lots under the same ownership since 1876, so it's considered a legal lot of record. The property has a historic dwelling, a barn, and outbuildings, as well as that existing RV park infrastructure. The surrounding land use is within rural residential or residential zones, specifically the UGB, which it abuts, is zoned residential. There is some land on the top of Mount Olca, so up to the north of the property, that is owned by the federal government, the USFS. Per our standards in Chapter 2, we mailed an official notice to neighbors and impacted agencies, partner agencies, on May 30th, 2024. We received USFS comment on June 12th, 2024. And as I mentioned, we did receive the draft cultural historical survey completed by an outside archaeologist on November 26, 2025. That was advanced to the United States Forest Service Heritage Program, their archaeologists, and they reviewed that and produced a report on January 16th, 2026. That was then forwarded to the tribes and to the State Historic Preservation Office for their review and comment on February 5th, 2026. We did not receive any comments from SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, or the tribal governments. And so we advanced forward by filing a newspaper notice and sending agency notification on April 16th, 2026. So again, it's a lengthy staff report. I'm not going to go in detail over the staff analysis, but I just want to give you a sense of all of the information that is required with such a complex land use permit. It's considered, and I'll go into this when I discuss really briefly conditional use review, but it is considered a conditional use permit, and therefore we had to do analysis for adverse impacts. We reviewed the preliminary landscaping plan, as I've mentioned, the cultural and historical survey and recommendations from the United States Forest Service. We reviewed a safety and fire plan, the wetland land use notification from the Department of State Lands. We reviewed floodplain data because of its adjacency to the Chenoweth Creek. We reviewed neighborhood compatibility analysis for zone and uses because of the size of the proposed new structure. Again, that's the shower restroom facility. We conducted key viewing area analysis. We reviewed the natural resource inventory and any impacts to those natural resources, and we reviewed recreation intensity and impacts. I'm going to go over the comments. So from the Wasco County Sheriff's Office, which is law enforcement in the National Scenic Area, the sheriff stated there are no issues with law enforcement. The district wildlife biologist for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife surveyed staff at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, said there may be a possibility for California mountain king snake at this site. And so we've have recommended conditions of approval with respect to the king snake that I'll get into in a little bit. The district wildlife biologist also discussed with fisheries staff, and they alerted us to possible Endangered Species Act listed species in Chenoweth Creek. And so again, we have a recommended condition of approval that speaks to that. We received, the only comment we received from the State Fire Marshal Office was no comments. Feedback we got from the Department of State Lands with the Woolon was that based on existing information, they believe that the RV park footprint and adjacent areas avoid impacts to jurisdictional wetlands and waterways. They do recommend a buffer, which is in part why applicant modified the proposed site map. And they stressed, again, that Chenoweth Creek is essential salmonoid habitat. The only neighbor comment we received was from Julie Twidwell, and I've summarized her very detailed comments, which we appreciated. She first called out that the application did not identify additional nearby county properties, and then made a series of recommendations. One, she recommended fire-adapted landscaping for wildfire protection and defensible space. She recommended a 100-foot buffer to the creek for wildlife protections, particularly salmonoid species. And she recommended measures to reduce lighting impact, including dark sky approved lighting. And as I assumed, commissioners would want to know what dark sky approved lighting looked like. I did a little bit of research because the commenter didn't provide that information in detail. And essentially, what dark sky quote unquote approved lighting calls for is downward directed light, avoiding glare, overlight, utilizing dimming, and minimizing blue light. Our standard, both in the National Scenic Area and also out in the county, is to require all development adhere to the good neighbor lighting policy, which is specifically calls for hooded lights that throw light down and minimize any kind of impacts to adjacent neighbors, regardless of what the development is. However, the scenic area goes above and beyond that and requires that any kind of new development have lights that are directed downward, limited in intensity, shielded, hooded in a manner that prevents the lighting from projecting onto adjacent properties, roadways, the Columbia River, or any visible key viewing areas, or contrasting with the surrounding landscape. So you will see a recommended condition of approval, specifically that reflects this management plan related requirement. Staff is recommending approval with conditions, and that's where the meat of my presentation goes in, is the conditions. So they're, again, pretty lengthy. So I'm going to try to click through these pretty quick. The first thing I'll say is, again, to reiterate, within Chapter 2, the director does have the ability to request a planning commission hearing. And so we did proceed with that, again, for the reasons stated at the top of the presentation. One of the things that we also require in Chapter 2 is that conditions of approval are recorded with the deed, and that makes sure that any future landowners are aware in perpetuity of the conditions affiliated with any conditional use. In terms of the review with Chapter 3, I found that the proposal conformed with a setback for campground and any height restrictions. And as I mentioned, based on the National Scenic Area Land Use and Development Ordinance and the management plan, a campground is considered a conditional use review in this zone. The recreational intensity class 4, which the site exists in, allows for campgrounds of 175 individual units or less for tents and vehicles. And it is consistent with management plan goals for recreation, economic development, and resource protections. The proposal is requesting 15 tent sites and 48 RV sites for a total of 63 spaces, which is consistent. And again, campgrounds are allowed conditionally. We evaluated impacts to road, fire, police, sewer, water, telephone, and electrical service, and are a series of recommended conditions that address these concerns. So I'm not going to read through them, but essentially our recommended conditions are that the applicant comply with relevant state law on those pieces. The one piece I will call out is that, and consistent with comments from neighbor Julie Twidwell, is that we've asked the applicant to define in detail quiet hours and any noise restrictions to reduce adverse impacts to adjacent neighbors, as well as identifying odor and dust controls, both for operation and for the construction and development phase. So we conducted some staff analysis to understand total daily trips of potential build out and full operation of the RV park, and staff calculated a 694.2 weekday trips. We did not receive any comments from the Oregon Department of Transportation. This property is accessed by the old highway, but we do have a recommended condition of approval that an access plan be reviewed by ODOT to ensure they agree with capacity of Highway 30 to handle those estimated trips. We're also recommending a condition of approval that prior to occupancy, applicants submit a security and safety plan to the sheriff that details on-site caretaker and staff, security and safety lighting and layout, evacuation routes and access, communication methods, and any additional safety and security measures that the applicant and the county put in place, both for the protection of visitors and staff, as well as adjacent neighbors. I'm going to go into in the chapter 14 section on conditions of approval relevant to those species that the district wildlife biologist talked about. Another piece of conditional uses is visual character. So added requirements that the visual character be consistent. It was made clear to us by the applicant that the intent is to continue to have utilities buried and to keep the majority of the parcel undeveloped. So again, it's 154, almost 155 acre parcel. Most of the parcel, according to the application, is intent to remain undeveloped. This is a copy of the preliminary landscape plan. You can see in green all of the existing vegetation that serves as a really useful screening. And I'll show some images from the key viewing analysis a little bit later on. You can see there is one circle close to the entrance on the old highway where some additional vegetative screening is planned to be planted to also aid in any visibility from the old highway or the river. But it's a pretty green property. So none of the 4 adjacent agriculturally designated properties are actively farmed or forested. So we didn't have any conditions of approval related to farm and forest impacts. And then finally, all CUPs, both in the National Scenic Area and outside in the county, are subject to revocation for noncompliance. And so that there is a condition of approval to reflect that. Basically, that means that if the applicant and property owner are found to be violating any of the conditions, we can go through a process to revoke their conditional use permit. Moving on to Chapter 11, which is the fire safety standard. We require all applications with a permit record their fire safety self-certification. Again, that's a heads up for future property owners. We also require clear posting of an address, and that's so that there's visibility to first responders, either fire or medical. We have a very extensive fire safety standard, and we have done that both in the National Scenic Area and the county for decades. That includes 50-foot fire fuel breaks, buildings consistent with fire safety standards, the driveway maintained to all weather standards, and turnouts and turnarounds provided consistent with Chapter 11. So just to give a little bit more detail to what that means, structures need to be set back from larger than 30% slopes. Any kind of structures need to be made of non-combustible exterior materials and have enclosed soffits. There need to be room around structures for emergency responders to maneuver and access. There need to be 90 to 95% compaction on driveway surfaces. On straightaways, 12-foot width, 14-foot width on curves. And then there is an option, there's a couple options in addition to these that I've listed, but a 95-foot diameter cul-de-sac or 120-foot hammerhead, and that's for emergency vehicles to access and to fight fire. Moving on to Chapter 4, the Scenic Area Review. Staff identified it's primarily in the pastoral landscape setting. So we conducted a surrounding study and found this was mostly for consideration of the 2,000 square foot shower and restroom. We found that it was consistent with other types of surrounding structures. And here's a chart that demonstrates the types of structures that we analyzed. Specifically, it's pretty close to Foley Lakes Mobile Home Park, which is probably the closest in land use, which contains a variety of manufactured homes, apartments, office, and storage, as well as accessory structures. Another pretty large structure that exists in the National Scenic Area with close proximity is the Chenoweth Middle School, which has a series of outbuildings, parking lots, surfaces, and other facilities used still today for various school district uses. As I discussed previously with respect to lighting, we do have a condition of approval requiring consistency with the management plan with respect to outdoor lighting. Anticipating there may be some ground disturbance, both with the construction of the structure, but also with repairs made to infrastructure requiring revegetation post any significant ground disturbance. And then there is a recommended condition of approval to retain all trees. I'm going to click through these again pretty quickly. This is in your packet. It's the key viewing area analysis. It just gives you a little bit of a window into the lengthy amount of analysis staff conducts in scenic area reviews, but it gives you snapshots of looking at where the RV park is currently situated and planned to be situated, how visible it is from Highway 30. And you can see that we have a good amount of trees on the property that screen any kind of activity. And that just gets you a sense. So there is, again, plans in the preliminary landscaping plan for the addition of one tree a little bit closer to the driveway to aid in that screening. For the structure, we do have a recommended condition of approval that the structure be painted dark earth tone consistent with the site, and that staff will are required to review and give approval on paint swatches. Similarly, the exterior needs to be done in non-reflective material and limited glass, and material samples also need to be subject to staff approval, and that's our standard operating procedure. I've talked a little bit about vegetation for that plant that's listed in the preliminary application close to the driveway that I've spoke of. The management plan requires that any new plantings used as screening be essentially increase visual subordinates within 5 years. So it can't be a tiny sapling. It needs to be a relatively mature tree when planted. Also want to make sure that with any type of landscaping that it be installed as soon as practicable, and that considerations are made for fire fuel break and retention guidelines consistent with the zone and scenic standards. So irrigation is definitely one consideration. To be consistent with the management plan, staff is also recommending that vegetation be native to the setting and at least a quarter coniferous, and that maintains that it has good coverage for visual subordinates and screening throughout the year, and that generally the landscaping should retain the open character of pastures and fields. That's pretty consistent with the bulk of the property. So that's a lot of the property to the west and also northwest of some of the existing development. All new parking lot expansions, we're recommending must be set back 100 feet from the edge of the pavement of Highway 30, which is consistent with the existing infrastructure and the driveway. Parking areas, we're recommending exceeding 50 spaces need to have interior landscape buffers to break up parking, and they need to be 20 feet. Based on the findings and recommendations from the Heritage Program at the United States Forest Service, we're requiring or recommending a condition of approval that a qualified archaeologist monitor all ground disturbance activity within the and adjacent to the recorded site boundaries. So there are pretty stringent processes for when cultural resources are discovered, specifically that they need to halt construction within 100 feet. Relevant parties, including the tribes, need to be notified within 24 hours. And then if human remains are inadvertently discovered, law enforcement is notified immediately, also in addition to the tribal parties. We do have, based on recommendations from the United States Forest Service, we're recommending a condition of approval to put the site on the National Register of Historic Places as a representation of historic ranching and pioneer families, and alerting the applicant and property owner that mitigation will be required for any maintenance or development to historic structures where adverse impacts are unavoidable. Now on to the critters. This is what a California mountain king snake looks like if you've never seen one here in the wilds of Wasco County. So we will be certain to post this at the campground, and we're recommending that the applicant and property owner make anybody engaged in construction aware of the existence. And if they see this during construction, they need to alert immediately and coordinate with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. That's also true for one of the species that was a potential for Chenoweth Creek, which is the Columbia pebble snake, or snail, sorry. I've got snakes on the brain now. So the real goal here is to make any guests to the RV park or tent spaces aware that there are endangered species potentially in Chenoweth Creek, and that folks, even though it's a beautiful scenic creek, they really need to avoid it in order to protect those species. There are two sensitive plant species. They are listed in the staff report, but I opted not to include them in the presentation just for consideration of their sensitivity. That will require any consultation with Orbic or the United States Forest Service if found during construction. And again, it's staff deems it relatively unlikely based on the proposal because it is a pretty disturbed area based on all the pavement that exists, but it'll be with the packet of information and a recommended condition of approval. There is a condition that consistent with the management plan, there is a maximum of 175 individual spaces for tents, no more than 10 RV per units per acre, and no more than 3 group campsite areas. The application falls well under those maximums. There's also a condition of approval that parking areas shall not exceed 250 vehicles. Property owners do have to sign and record a farm forest management easement. And just as a reminder, that's essentially a document that acknowledges there may be farmer forest practices happening adjacent to the property. And the intent in the state of Oregon is generally to reduce any kind of nuisance related litigation. To protect and preserve the scenic and historic character, we're also recommending a condition of approval that signs be limited to those that are necessary. And I'll get into signs a little bit further on. The applicant will be required to submit and demonstrate water system is adequate for emergency fire suppression, and that access drives have that minimum 12-foot with a maximum grade of 12%, and they'll be passable to firefighting apparatus. So in order to achieve some of these conditions, another condition is that the developer is required to provide a final site map to meet all the provisions in Chapter 17, which is the RV park standards. And that's going to include a road approach, garbage disposal sites, electric service plan, signage replacement, water sewer facilities, shower restroom facilities, parking, lighting, security, fencing, and landscaping. A recommended condition of approval is that no RV shall be permanently established, and that's also ensures consistency with the management plan. We're recommending a condition that a certificate of sanitation is required, and that's consistent with Oregon law. We are recommending a serviceable caretaker's residence, and restrooms are required. And again, we're recommending that restrooms be ADA accessible. We're on the home stretch. This is the last slide. Chapter 23 deals with our sign provisions. And again, in the scenic area, because of resource protections, specifically with signs, it's scenic area, scenic resource protections. There are a lot of standards to basically make sure that signs are unobtrusive. So we have recommended conditions that any support structures are unobtrusive and have low visual impact. Letters can have sufficient contrast to provide clear messages, but they must blend with the setting to the maximum extent practicable. So that just means like no bright neon signs, no McDonald's, mustard and ketchup signs. Again, the back of signs need to be unobtrusive, blending in with the surroundings, non-reflective. Spotlighting can be allowed where it needs for nighttime visibility. So if folks are looking to locate the RV park and they're coming in at night, it's acceptable to have a sign that has some spotlighting, but backlighting is not permitted. Entry name signs shall not exceed 40 square feet per sign. And again, we have a condition of approval that the sign can't be luminous, flashing lights, neon, no moving elements, not portable, not installed in park cars. So no wacky wavy inflatable tube mans. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and open it up for Planning Commissioner questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Ashley, I have a question, 2 questions actually. Is there a length of time that an RV can come in and stay? Is this like overnight from off the freeway, or is this permanent RV people can stay for 6 months?
The management plan has a limitation to the stay, so it has to be a short stay, which is typically 30 days.
Most places 14, so I just wondered.
Some of that would be a licensing issue worked out after we've received the land use permit as well.
I can't hear you, Dan.
Daniel Doherty, Wasco County Planning Division Director. So some of that question, as Director Hazen-Clever pointed out, is taken care of in the management plan, but it's also a licensing issue as well. So it would be more or less a licensing issue. Technically, if a maximum amount of time of 30 days is allowed, then the licensor could restrict it to 5 days or 14 days. So
Explain the licensor.
so this is a land use permit. So these are provisions that follow the property.
Right.
But after the land use permit is given approval, and if the applicant is able to develop the actual RV park, there are going to be specific license provisions for people that want to utilize the RV park. So it's like any RV park. When you enter the RV park, you generally have to sign some type of license to actually use the property. So it would likely be a licensing issue that could be more restrictive than potentially the land use provisions.
So the applicant, if the proposal is approved, the applicant then will have discretion over certain items with limitations within that discretion, for example, the 30 days.
That's correct. That's correct. There are some land use provisions that are explicit, right? That they provide very much severe strict limitations, but within the license for use of the RV park between the licensor and the licensee, there could be provisions within it that would restrict the use of the RV park to 14 days.
Just for purposes of clarification, because I'm a little confused, is the county going to be the licensor? Is the county going to operate this RV camping spot, a camp spot? Or does it have an option of assigning that right to a third party to operate it and manage it?
Yes, I can't answer the first question, but I can answer that the county would have an option to potentially provide a third party operator for this RV park. So
Second part of my question, will each campsite have a sanitary sewer hookup, or is that going to have to be a pull out and dump?
the intent is for each site to utilize a sanitary and water system hookup.
That wasn't real
And
clear.
Chair, that's consistent with the existing infrastructure that's there.
I couldn't really determine when I went through that though.
Yeah.
That's why I asked.
So existing is individual hookups for each of the RV sites.
And I believe that they are identified in the preliminary plan. But again, that's the point of this is to identify issues like that so we can actually update that preliminary plan if we're missing anything. So
Are there other questions from the?
Yeah.
commission?
I have some questions. It's
Go ahead.
Russell, Russell Hargrave. Hi. You mentioned licenses. Who licenses the RV park? Is there like a state agency that would license it? Who would license it?
Commissioner, pertaining to licensing, I was speaking about the actual operation of the RV park. So there was a question pertaining to length of stay. And there is provisions within the land use ordinance that limit the length of stay. And then there's the actual functioning and operation of the recreational vehicle park and campsite. With regards to whether or not the county will be that actual licensor, that I can't answer, but it does have the option to potentially provide a third party the ability to actually operate and run the RV park.
So-
This is Jim Foster. The
so-
term
sorry, Ed.
licensee and licensor, you're using in a legal sense. Essentially, it's the operator as the licensor, whoever that may be, and the person who comes into the park as the licensee. So it's a technical legal term as opposed to what we think about of getting a license to do something. It's the same idea, but it gets a little confusing, I think, when we use that term.
That's correct. So the operator of the RV park will have to have provisions for folks that are coming off the road and want to stay. And so the operator, whoever that may end up being, may provide for stays up to 30 days or stays that are limited to 14 days.
Can I finish my question?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So you said there's a limit in the LUDO. Is that a 30-day limit then, Dan?
I believe so. Let me take a look at that, Commissioner. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
And Commissioner Hargrave, if I can just share, the Oregon Health Authority typically has some oversight into approval and review of facilities, tourist facilities like RV parks. So one of the conditions that's standard with any type of application is the applicant is required to be consistent with any state, local, or regional or federal laws. And so the applicant will be required to follow up with the Oregon Health Authority to make sure that the RV park is consistent with state law.
Thank you. I had a couple
And
of
I want to be very clear, like we are acting as applicants. So, so when I'm answering as the applicant, not necessarily staff reviewer. So
Sure. I have a few other questions if you want to take them while you're figuring out the 30-day thing. I was mainly curious as I read through this, why does the county want an RV park? Why do we want to operate an RV park? I'm not against it. I'm just curious.
well, as applicants, I think we believe that it's the highest and best use of the property. And as Director Housing Glover pointed out, that the property was developed as an RV park in 89 throughout the 90s and early 2000s. It was actively being developed. And from our understanding, that permit inevitably expired. We're not really exactly sure why it expired, potentially financial constraints. But as staff's presentation pointed out on the aerial image, you can see much of the property directly south of the existing development. The homestead development has been developed out for the use as an RV park. Staff has walked the site many times in developing the application, and there's a lot of infrastructure there that exists there. Now, of course, the scenic area has some limitations. It's kind of a catch-22. It's very difficult to ascertain the condition of the existing infrastructure without a land use permit. We have to have a land use permit in order to dig because of the previously discussed cultural and potential historical issues with the property. The second, I mean, there's a number of pieces that I was gonna wait until it was my time to speak, but since the questions been posed, additional recreational housing for Wasco County, potential emergency shelter facilities. This is a big one because I was the planning division operated as the applicants for the emergency shelter application that Director Housing Glover pointed out earlier. And if we would have otherwise had an operating recreational vehicle park as a publicly owned facility, public showers and restrooms could have been made available immediately after the fire. And I say could have because that's ultimately a political discussion, but the potential is there. And so the potential to use it as an emergency shelter for those public facilities would have otherwise existed. If this recreational vehicle park is ultimately built, then in the future, during a disaster, whether it's a wildfire or other disaster, those facilities could be made available potentially for folks in need.
Daniel,
Oh,
I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
economic benefits, local housing for event and tourism.
So those are all good things. but I'm not understanding why the county would want to do it. It's certainly suitable for an RV park, so typically the government would sell it to someone who might want to put an RV park there. I've not seen the county, um, get engaged in this kind of private enterprise before, and I was just wondering what the thinking was. And what I'm hearing is it might be used as an emergency uh, to support people in an emergency, but I don't know how well that would work. So if you had, it would typically be full, let's say. You've got all your sites full, all your people are there. Would they really welcome a bunch of other people coming in and using the showers, or would that violate the agreement that they have for when they brought their RV in there? I mean, if the use is for emergency, then why create an RV park? And the other thing you said is that I think I heard is it would address the housing crisis, but this is designed for temporary stays, not for housing. So I am a little confused why the county is pursuing it.
So I'll clarify. It could be used for additional recreational housing for Wasco County. In order to support local economic needs, such as potentially events, tourism, a wider variety of different events that happen locally. With regards to the potential as an emergency shelter, it would be publicly owned. Again, this is hypothetical. It would be publicly owned. So again, it's the potential. That would be a political question beyond the scope of this request. I hesitate to answer some of these questions because some of these questions are beyond planning staff that actually put together the application, the land use application. So, but we do know that the Board of County Commissioners voted to purchase the property, and that we have been obligated to make this application available to the Community Development Director for review. So I do want to point out also some secondary and tertiary considerations. Reduced trespassing, so enhanced security because of the proposed use, as well as increased fire safety. Because again of the proposed use, right now it's not being used. It's not developed. So these, and again, Commissioner, with respect, these are just secondary and tertiary issues that we think as applicants broadly lead to the property's highest and best use.
Yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of good reasons why it's a good place for an RV park. I just don't understand the rationale why the county would be the applicant or run the RV park or get involved in private enterprise to that extent. But maybe I'm, that's just, I'm not hearing a compelling reason why the county is doing this. I'm hearing compelling reasons why it's a good thing to do. I had a couple other questions. One is,
I have an answer for the
oh, sure, thank you.
day piece, Commissioner. So there's not any clear definition about the length of stay, with the exception of in the definition chapter, which limits basically defines recreational vehicle as 30 days or less. And anything above 30 days, it would be considered a dwelling unit. And so that's really where we get the 30 days. And then if I can, Commissioner, say, as Planning Division Director indicated, we're really not the appropriate staff to address some of those concerns about the purpose or why the county is pursuing an RV park. we're really operating under the guidance and direction of, planning division staff that serves as the applicant was really operating under the guidance and direction of the administrative officer on behalf of the Board of County Commissioners. So some of those questions I think are really valid and important, and I'm happy to pass those along to the administrative officer and the Board of County Commissioners, but staff's just not going to be able to answer those questions for you today.
Sure, fair enough, Kelly. I had a couple others, more in your bailiwick. One is, it is adjacent to a large industrial mining operation, and I didn't hear that mentioned in the analysis. Is that a concern either way? In other words, is it a concern for people in the RV park that they're adjacent to a mining operation? And would it, I mean, we talked about signing an easement to recognize the adjacent farming operations. What about the adjacent mine?
Thank you, Commissioner. So there isn't a corollary either in our land use and development ordinance or in Oregon state law for a similar easement to be required with respect to mining operation. Mining operations are typically in the state of Oregon, a common conditional use permit. So they perhaps can be covered under more broadly the farm and forest management easement. But what I can say about the existence of the aggregate pit and mining operation is identified in the staff report. It is part of the compatibility analysis. And one of the things that typically bothers most folks about mining operations is truck traffic. So it's a different access road that's some distance up the highway away. The other thing that typically bothers folks is dust or asphalt batching. And that activity predominantly for Munson paving occurs down inside the UGB of the city of the Dalles, down by Clint's, kind of like the riverfront industrial area. So some of those usual like noise, dust considerations or truck traffic considerations that normally aggravate people about mining operations are really somewhat removed from this parcel. And having toured the site on a site visit and seeing the mining activity, it's at such a distance that it's really inaccessible to RV customers and tent customers. So it wasn't part of the analysis because of that distance and because the existing operations mitigate those typical concerns with mining operations.
Yeah, those are all good points. I would just also add that depending on which day you visited, they do blast up there pretty frequently, but not every day. So the blasting is louder and does cause dust. But yeah, okay, so it sounds like you've considered it. The other I was going to propose, in terms of the dark sky condition, the way it's written, it looks to me like it would only apply to the facility itself, so the shower and so forth. But I think it should apply to the residents because a lot of the RV parks that I've seen, if they're staying there a while, sometimes they'll string a whole string of light bulbs out from their RV to wherever. I think that the RVs should also have to comply with dark sky requirements. I'm proposing that as an extension to the condition. So we can see if anyone agrees with me when we get to making motions. That's all I had.
Commissioner Davis, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Everything's been covered for me.
Thank you. Commissioner McIntyre?
I don't have any questions. I just had a comment about the estimated average daily traffic numbers. I think it was 600 and some vehicle trips per day. And that's based on a typical residential use, which usually has a couple of cars, taking kids to school, appointments, going to work. So I think that the average daily traffic volume for a campground would be substantially less of an impact. That's all.
Commissioner Foster.
I have a couple of questions. First, obviously, we experienced the devastating fire last year. To a certain extent, that could have continued down the hill towards this property. To what extent do you propose a buffer between the actual location of the RV park, because you still have a lot of acres, and a potential fire coming down the hill? And added to that is, are there water rights on the property that provide for irrigation?
From my understanding, no, to the water rights, but the idea is to connect to Chenoweth Water District's water. And you correct me if I'm wrong. I think they are amenable to it.
Yeah, they commented for the prior application that was approved in April for the emergency temporary
Yeah.
housing. And Chenoweth Creek, Chenoweth Water District said they just outlined their process, but there's been discussions, I understand, with the county and Chenoweth Water District, so that they will have access. And then one of the conditions of approval, I'll just remind Commission, it was to ensure that there was water for emergency firefighting purposes.
And I think it's important to recognize that right now that infrastructure does not exist. So under this land use permit, and if development does occur, then that infrastructure would exist for Mid-Columbia and other firefighting agencies.
Well, to the extent that either the county develops this property, or whether they have it developed by a third party, licensee essentially, it seems to me that additional acreage can provide a buffer for any vehicles, and additionally to the property that's just to the south of them across the creek.
And that's correct.
If I can just add to, I think it's important, and maybe this addresses some of Commissioner Hargrave's concerns. I haven't been, again, involved in the application development for this parcel, but I have been engaged in lots of conversations about the extensive work that's happening at the fairgrounds down in Tide Valley. And one of the benefits of the investments the county have made, and both in the actual fairgrounds, but in the adjacent Hunt Park, RV Park, is giving us, just as you suggest, Commissioner Foster, some resiliency and sustainability with respect to emergencies. So what we see when we inevitably have large-scale fires happening in that portion of the county is that the fairgrounds are utilized as a fire camp for many of our first responders. And the goal is to have a corollary in the north portion of the county. So just as you suggested, having a preparedness aspect, I think, is one of the reasons why there's a condition with respect to emergency water. But I think there's also in approving the emergency housing provision, it gives us that additional North County destination for evacuation, for example.
Well, I've lived in the Dalles for 54 years, and the most recent fire certainly has not been the only fire in that area. So to the extent that we can do anything to improve the protection of that property and the remainder of the community, I think that's important. The other thing to respond to the question about why the county would get involved in this, I am an absolute believer that both the city and the county and the other public bodies within the community have an obligation to support anything that constitutes an economic development project. I see this as a real benefit to the community in terms of getting people off the highway and into the community spending money, which is clearly what economic development is all about. So I am very supportive of this, and I commend all of the work that's been done by the staff in putting this together. I'm amazed by the amount of detail and the quality of work that's been done.
I would also like to point out that it is best practices for internally displaced persons, so folks that have suffered, survivors of disaster that have lost homes. It's best practice to try and house them as near possible to the loss. And so, as Director Housing Glover pointed out, this is a potential area that could very well be used for that.
I have a couple comments. I'm an RVer and I go all over the Pacific Northwest with my pickup and trailer. One thing, the dark light thing, that would be almost versatile. The lights on those campers or trailers are not shielded, so it goes straight down. It would have to, all manufacturers would have to change their lighting on the exterior of those trailers to achieve dark light or night light, whatever you want to call it. Just that even the door light above your door, it goes out. It doesn't just go down.
The applicant is amenable to any potential recommended conditions that have a nexus to the National Scenic Area Land Use and Development Ordinance for Wasco County.
Okay. But I'm just saying it might not be attainable for the people coming in to stay. And most RV site trailers like this have a limit, a very short-term limit for you to stay because they want it to revolve. If they're going to let them be there 30 days, you're basically just making a mobile home park for RVers. And they're not going to move. They'll move from one site. I've seen it happen. They move from G2 to G3. 30 days later, they may move to BC or whatever. This is gonna become a mobile home park.
Can't trust those people.
They won't. And I'm sorry, but I see it as a site for the homeless people to move in. If they have a provision, fine, but they've got to pay for their site. That's my problem with it being county owned.
So Commissioner, I can pass along those recommendations to the county administrative officer if you like. I think those are great. That's great feedback. And I'm happy to pass that along.
As applicant, we have an obligation to, and that's that.
Why aren't they here?
Well, as representatives of the applicant, I am here speaking on behalf of the applicant, and as Director Housing Glover pointed out, we will provide that to the administrative officer, those recommendations. They're not directly linked, from my understanding, to explicit provisions and criteria within the National Scenic Land Use and Development Ordinance for Wasco County, but they're well met considerations that we can definitely pass along and or directly Housing Glover.
Another question I have on the signage, I understand the provision for the type of signage, but is there going to be signage like out on the freeway where they have the gas, available food, gas, that type of thing where they advertise the hotels and motels and restaurants up and down the freeway? Is this campground going to be advertised as such for overnighters?
I'm going to pass it to Sean Bailey, Senior Planner Sean Bailey, for that answer. He actually wrote that portion of the application. But
I would have to look at the specifics. I know we do have requirements for signage that are mentioned ODOT might actually have additional signage requirements that aren't covered by us, as well as approach permit requirements. So there might be additional restrictions from other agencies. And that could go circling back to fire, as we develop. If the fire marshal, Mid-Columbian Fire Rescue, or Building Code Services have additional requirements, our included recommended condition for federal, state, local requirements to be met prior to development. There could be additional ones that come out through development, but signage, I believe most of the sign requirements were on the property itself, and they didn't get to advertise it.
Oh, if the intent of the applicant to market from the highway.
That is not within this application. Any signage provisions is specifically limited to the actual private property. So, and again, as the applicant, we haven't gotten that far quite yet.
We can pass along that feedback though.
Yes. But I will say that all signage provisions on the property and staff's recommended condition, I wanted to clarify that staff's recommended conditions of approval are geared towards meeting those visual subordinate standards, and ensuring that we're following all of the said criteria within the National Scenic Area Land Use Development Ordinance.
And that includes, for lighting, to go back to that, the visual screening that currently surrounds the existing RV park location is pretty substantial. It's mature trees in all directions. And then there was actually 2 spots for additional screening. One, Director Housley Glover covered just to the south of the existing approach, where there's a gap. There's another to the north, as you come around Highway 30, turning from the southwest to south facing, going towards the Dalles. There is another gap that proposed vegetative screening will be included as well.
Okay, those vegetative screenings are great as long as the oak trees are leafed out. What are you going to do when fall comes and they all come down in all winter? There's no screening.
That's why we have.
It's a quarter requirement for a quarter of the trees to be coniferous.
Yeah, there's all requirements for specific.
But those won't be immediately. Those are 10 to 15 years out.
And that's why there's that requirement that they be mature within 5 years. So that's part of the recommended conditions of approval. Commissioner, if I could just address the stay too, I just conferred with the Administrative Services Director, Allie Postlethwaite, who manages many of our facilities and properties in the county, and she's confirmed that the intent is for the RV stays at the Oak Ranch Park RV to be 14-day stay.
Thank you. That's better than 30 days.
Yep.
Any other questions from any more commissioners? Any questions from non-commissioners? Hearing none, we'll close the hearing. Pen went off. Does the applicant have any further discussion?
I really appreciate the questions. I hope I answered all of them sufficiently, the ones I could, but no, Chair.
Thank you. If there's no further testimony or request, is there any request that the record be remain open? Hearing, the public hearing is closed and the planning commission will enter into deliberation. Is there any further deliberation?
For purposes of getting us, in a position where we can either accept a motion or amend a motion, I would move that we adopt the findings of as presented and approve the request for a conditional use permit.
I would second.
Were there any additions from the commissioners for further findings or conditions? Hearing none. We'll take a vote, and this time I'd like a voice individual vote.
Chair, would you like me to roll call for a vote?
Please. Yes, please.
Okay. Vice Chair Vicky Ashley,
Affirmative.
Commissioner Lynn McIntyre,
Yes.
Commissioner Russ Hargrave,
Abstain.
Commissioner Mike Davis,
Affirm.
and Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Thank you. The hearing,
Commissioner, that was a 4 yes and a 1 abstain.
right. I guess this hearing will be closed then with the affirmative vote. Anything else?
So we need to, there's a few items that where you have to state the
Yep.
planning commission decision and then discuss the appeal process, Chair. That's on page 5 towards the bottom where it says state clearly to the audience.
Okay. The recorded vote is affirmative for the decision, for the proposal to go forward. The appeal process to the county commissioners. Notice of this decision will be mailed Wednesday, May 13th, 2026. The appeal period is 15 days from the date of mailing and will expire at 4 p.m. on Thursday, May 28th, 2026. If no appeal is filed, the decision of the planning commission in this matter is final. Motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'll make that.
Commissioner Hargrave moves to adjourn.
I second.
Commissioner Davis second. The vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Thank you, commissioners.
It was
Okay.
standard that we do a director update. Yes, one person, the commissioner. Do you want us to do a director update?
Because I have a commissioner.
You can have a commissioner update too. We
Yeah.
haven't done that, but that might be fun.
We still have vacancy, as I understand, and we
We do. We have some folks who've peeled off, so we have an additional vacancy. We appreciate Mr. Foster joining us. Commissioner Nichols was moved up into a vacated role. He unfortunately had a conflict with the Gorge Commission hearing today, so couldn't attend. We're hoping to peel him back off of that within the next 6 months.
Sorry, Roger is still on the planning commission then?
He is still on the planning
Yeah.
commission, yes. He would have had to recuse himself anyway as the
Yeah.
both the reviewing body for the legislative piece and the potential appellate body for the application. So it's acceptable. He had a good lots of excuses for not being in attendance today. I can give some brief overview about what's happening from a community development department perspective and some of the things that you may be seeing and hearing and thinking about. And then I will pass it over to Daniel, who leads the day-to-day management of the planning division department. We have shifted into a community development department with the goal of overseeing development services, some economic development, and working on a variety of other issues that impact our community in unincorporated Wasco County. This also nicely nestles our Tri-County Hazardous Waste and Recycling Program, which has lived with our department for a number of years, but often confuses folks about why it lives with planning. One of the things that I'll be taking on with respect is extending what community development does with respect to solid waste. So when we lost the sanitarian over at the public health district, we lost that capacity to to convene the Solid Waste Advisory Council, and that's a statutory requirement with respect to the regional landfill. So I'm working through that process with the county attorney and some other stakeholders to rebuild that Solid Waste Advisory Council and also update all of our contracts with respect to the landfill. The landfill is, I think, entertaining some possible new renewable gas facility to convert the methane burn that's currently happening at the landfill. So it's likely staff will be reviewing that project. I think they're in a pre-application phase with that. So that will be a new component of what we do on behalf of our community, is more holistically dealing with all types of solid waste, including hazardous and recycling. We are engaged in a variety of economic development related projects and continuing to look for opportunities. One of the primary focuses of a lot of my work over the last year has been Rowena recovery. So not only advocating and working with the Gorge Commission to amend the management plan, but also supporting the long-term recovery group, which holistically addresses survivors' long-term recovery. And that's, we convened predominantly bureaucrats who can help with technical assistance. And then we've started to fold in, as they feel capable and willing, survivors from that incident. And there are conversations happening at that level of extending those services more broadly. And that is consistent with a lot of the work with natural hazard mitigation and our community wildfire defense, or community wildfire protection plan. So looking forward to continuing our work in the disaster space and thinking more about recovery in addition to the mitigation work that we've been doing for a number of decades. The other thing I'll highlight relevant to today's topic is that it was really unusual to have an out-of-plan review cycle for an update to the management plan, and I am very grateful for the Gorge Commission for being an excellent partner in moving that work forward. There was a question about corollaries in the county, and actually Lane County, who's one of those counties impacted by the 2020 wildfires, has put forth a requested amendment to Oregon state planning rules to extend the RV, temporary RV language from 5 years to 10. So we're seeing that the work that we're doing in the scenic area is really consistent with what we're hearing from the 2020 wildfires, which is folks just need more time to be able to recover in the way that's helpful. Another thing that I've been really actively engaged in is legislature over the last few years. Last year in the long session, we had a record number of over 4,000 bills. Many of them were driven at land use and had pretty significant impacts to the land use planning program. Energy is really hot right now, and also housing, as you can imagine. Short session was pretty fast and furious, not a lot of impacts to the land use planning program, but we are anticipating, again, a very aggressive long session in 2027 where we see a lot of bills related to housing and energy. One of the things that I've been doing is I sat on a work group for the Oregon Energy Strategy, and I've been bird dogging those energy related issues. There was some regulation through a rules advisory committee that was passed to modify for Eastern Oregon counties some of our solar siting standards to basically create a fast track local process for permitting some of these large scale solar projects. We did encourage the board, and they did move forward by resolution to opt out of those proceedings until staff has more time to evaluate those provisions, because they're pretty complicated. So only a few of our counterparts, one being Morrow, who is very advanced in the energy space, did remain opted into that program. Most of our counterparts opted out just for the sheer need of needing a lot of additional time. And as staff can tell you, one of the big projects that's under review right now in the Juniper Flat region is highly contentious, and it's very complicated. And even though we're participating as advisors to the Oregon Department of Energy staff, it's taken an incredible amount of staff resources and time to evaluate that. So the thought of adding additional strain and capacity on our staff to review very large scale solar was untenable at this point in time. The other thing that is going to come down the pike pretty fast and furious, I was engaged in the Rules Advisory Committee for Goal 5 Cultural Resources in the state. And that work primarily focused on higher notifications for our tribal partners in the state with respect to any kind of land use decision that happens in any jurisdiction in the state of Oregon. I participated in that RAC based on our experience in the National Scenic Area, really looking to make sure we avoided some of the pitfalls we experienced with cultural resources in the National Scenic Area. What's going to come out of that are going to be, this body is going to see some changes to the way we process applications, specifically again on our sort of ministerial or over-the-counter applications. There will be inadvertent discovery language on everything that passes our desk, so that folks are aware of what the process is if they're digging and they do find human remains. But again, more broadly, any type of land use decision, staff will be having to notify identified tribal partners on those applications and give them an opportunity to comment. There's an additional portion of that which allows tribal parties to present to the county a request to identify culturally significant landscape sites and then to go through a process to recognize those within the ordinance. It's a very complicated process. Those of us on the RAC expressed that we saw a lot of challenges with implementing that, but there was a sense from the Land Conservation Development Commission that we needed to move forward with notifying tribes and having them participate in the land use process. And so it's likely we will see additional iterations and refinement of that, but that is something that's coming down the pike. And then happy to answer any other questions, but I will turn it over to Daniel. He has some additional updates about what we'll be doing in the short term with respect to land use and development ordinance updates that are legislative. And you can talk about the transportation systems plan. One more thing, the management plan review is supposed to kick off in 2027. So that's the big scale review like Gorge 2020. One of the benefits of working with the Gorge Commission staff through the disaster recovery modernization is that I've formed really good relationships with their staff, and they are really amenable to working directly with Wasco County and other county partners ahead of broad public consumption to take a look at things that we requested the last go round and make sure that the commission is addressing those things moving forward. So if this commission, in your wisdom and experience at implementing National Scenic Area guidelines, have recommendations for improvements to the management plan, now would be a really great time. I'm supposed to get an early sneak peek at that list within the next 2 weeks. So with that, I will pass it along to Daniel. Thank you.
May I ask you a question?
Of course.
On the methane, you talked about the solid waste at the landfill site. Klickitat PUD, of course, got involved in that big time. And I think they found it not to be as economically beneficial as they thought it was going to be. I would urge you to, before we get involved as a county in that process, to engage with Northern Wasco County PUD, who are the real experts in this area in terms of energy. And I'm sure that Kurt Conger or the manager out there would be happy to spend some time with you. I think they consider you a partner in the community, and they're a real resource before you get too far down the rabbit's hole.
So just to be clear, it's not us, but we would be the permitting body.
Yeah.
So we're not, the landfill's independently owned by Waste Connections, Inc. So it would be them pursuing with a partner, the renewable natural gas facility. It would just be us permitting
I
it.
think to the extent that you can get educated by other sources before you get into that permitting process.
No, that's very helpful.
That would
Thank
be
you.
helpful.
That's great. That's great
Thank you.
feedback. Thanks.
Yeah, as Director Housing Glover pointed out, it would be a planning division permit that they would run through. So I don't need to point out too many things. February 26th email covered most of what Director Glover pointed out, we've been able to knock two things out, which is the National Scenic Area Land Use and Development Ordinance update, as well as this recreational vehicle park. As Director Hauser Glover pointed out, and the email pointed out in February, we do have updates to our Chapter 10 fire safety standards that are long overdue. I'm putting together a steering committee, well, a subcommittee from our Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan steering committee that's going to include several wildfire and fire experts. We've already got a very, very preliminary draft, but we'll be putting that subcommittee together within the next couple weeks and preparing for public comments on any proposed changes to our Chapter 10 fire safety standards. We also have our Overlay Zone 2 map that we need to update. We updated our code last year, I believe, and it's helped expedite landslide hazard applications through Planning Division. It makes it quite a bit faster for applicants to obtain a land use permit, and it still retains our goal, which is health, safety, and welfare of folks that are building in those identified landslide hazards. However, new mapping from Dogami has identified upwards of 3,000 new polygons. And so this may very well be an interesting update to our map. However, I will point out that many of the new polygons, the new landslide polygons, are along very steep sloped areas near rivers. And so Senior Planner Sean Bailey is going to be leading that update with my assistance. And we will identify those areas that are likely uninhabitable or likely unbuildable, hopefully to allay folks' fears. Because right now, the current Overlay Zone 2 map has about 300 polygons. And it's built on a wide array of different studies going back to the 1960s. So as pointed out by Director Glover, as well as my email in February, Goal 5 cultural areas, we are going to have to address that. I pointed out the no net loss standards, which we've been dealing with since 2024. I think it was July of 2024. That has not gone away. We're still waiting for FEMA's final environmental impact statement to be issued. Or, of course, a particular court case to actually file an injunction. And that might actually have a long-term pause on updating our Overlay Zone 1. For the new commissioner, Mr. Foster, this pertains to the no net loss standards that FEMA has demanded that Oregon counties and cities obtain with regards to identified fish species that are identified as endangered. Again, Director Glover covered the state-reviewed Energy Facility Siting Council issues we've been dealing with, but they are pointed out in that email that was sent. Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, as I pointed out, we've brought in code compliance. I think it's essential. I think it's long past due. The code compliance officer is our enforcement arm for nuisance abatement as well as land use violations, and is essential to health and safety. And so we're hoping that moving or involving code compliance in our natural hazards mitigation plan can help bridge that gap between the public's understanding of code compliance and natural hazard mitigation. So that's been a big deal for us. And I think pretty much other than that, Director Glover covered everything else. So unless there's any questions.
I have a question. Where do we stand on the floodplain maps? With
Okay. The floodplain maps we're still waiting. I believe it's 2027. Yeah, it's 2027 from memory. We just received word so the maps are not linked to the preliminary implementation compliance measures. They are different issues, but we're still waiting for those maps.
Well, I knew we appealed
Yes,
their decision.
and that process just closed, so
Okay.
closed very recently.
Just
So
to clarify, the county didn't appeal, but some parties
Yes.
within the city of the Dalles did.
I believe that was likely the potentially the preliminary implementation compliance measures issue.
Oh, and the county did award some money to the Oregonians for floodplain action or protection for some ongoing litigation related to an injunction on the biop. So that might be it too.
That concludes the update. So, and again, I send out updates every couple months to planning commissioners. So if you have any other issues or questions pertaining to those updates, just feel free to email me or reach out to me by phone. So.
And I can share too, I think the housing updates that we worked on last year and were adopted by the board last year have been really successful as far as I understand from planning division staff. And we had one application for an accessory dwelling unit.
I think
I don't know. Yep. Only one so far. But I think folks have found those rules that we went through and adopted really user friendly. So that's been great work. Appreciate the Planning Commission continuing to work on improving our ordinance and our comp plan. Thank you.
Oh, any questions or thoughts from from other commissioners? All right, thanks, everybody. I guess we're done.
Thank you. Very
Thank
much
you.
appreciated.
Thank you.